welcome to my channel. My name is Maggie. I'm 26 years old and I was a non-traditional pre-med student. I applied for the 2021 application cycle and I have recently been accepted into medical school. So I'll be starting in the summer or the fall. I don't know yet because I'm still deciding where I'm actually going to be going. But today's video is all about my MCAT study schedule and how I studied for the MCAT. And just to give you a little bit of background, I did take the MCAT 2 times. The first time was in 2016, the first time that I applied to medical school, and I got a 509 and I was really happy about that score. Sadly, I obviously didn't get in the first time, so 3 years later, I was all ready to apply to medical school again and my MCAT score had expired. So I had to take it again and I was really upset about that. So just something to keep in the back of your mind, they do expire after a couple years or 3 years. Anyway, even though I was happy with that first score, there were two main things that I knew that I could do better once I accepted the fact that I had to take the test again. And that was one, emphasis on timing. When I first took the MCAT, I did not finish 3 of the sections. I had 10 questions left to go and had to just guess B for all of the questions that I had left. And I finished cars perfectly on time because I knew that that would be the hardest section to finish on time. So I put a lot of emphasis on my cars timing strategy. And with the other 3 sections, I didn't do enough passage-based practice. So I didn't finish. And so obviously I remembered that from the first time and I'm like, okay, that's one big thing that I know that I can improve. And then the other thing was, like I kind of already mentioned, was passage-based practice, which goes along with timing because that's why it took so much time, because trying to figure out what the heck those passages are talking about took so much time for me. So doing more passage-based practice. So when I was deciding when to take the MCAT for the second time, there was 2 things in mind, and one was wanting to have at least 4 months to study. The first time I had 3 months and that worked perfectly because I didn't have a job and I didn't have any time commitments. I woke up, went to the library, was there by 8 a.m. every day and studied until between 2 and 4 p.m., just depending on the day. And this time I worked full-time as an EMT. So I was terrified about that because I did have it so easy the first time. And now I had bills to pay and a full-time job to juggle. But luckily my schedule was very flexible and I would study anywhere between 3 and 5 days per week. And then the other thing besides wanting 4 months to study was just wanting to have my score in by the time that secondaries rolled in. And what I mean by that is just basically around July is when you get your secondaries. And if your score isn't in by July, then you have to delay your application. So this is a subject for another video, but when I applied the first time, it was a little late in the cycle. And that was another thing related to the application timeline that I wanted to improve, was applying early. So I submitted my primary application 2 to 3 days after it opened. And I wanted my MCAT score in shortly after that, basically just before secondaries rolled in, so that I could apply and be on time as early as possible. So that was the 2 things that I was considering, was at least 4 months to study and doing it early enough. So I originally picked April and quickly changed that. I started to study a few days in December. When I was home for the holidays, I did a few chapters and then I really started studying in January. So January, February, March, and then I planned to take it originally in April. And then I was like, oh no, that's a little too soon. So I decided on May 29th. After about a month of studying, I was like, okay, May 29th is my date. And then of course, COVID happened. So it got pushed back a little bit, but it all worked out. And my test date ended up being June 19th. And by that time I was really burnt out, but not the point. Okay. So as far as how I made my study schedule, of course, I've taken it before. So I did the same thing that I did before with a little bit of things added in. Like I said before, I knew what I needed to improve on. But the main structure of my study schedule was the same. 3 phases. And if you've done any Googling or watching other YouTube videos, you've probably already heard like 3 phases. And what that means to me is that your first phase is content review. I used the Princeton review books, which I wouldn't say that I loved, but they worked. And I only say that because the first time I used Exam Crackers and Next Step. No. I used Exam Crackers and Kaplan the first time that I studied for the MCAT. I don't know why I had 2 sets of books, but I did. And I really like those because Exam Crackers especially had really great mnemonics, really great illustrations, just a lot of cool things on the side to help you remember certain concepts. And My one complaint with the Princeton Review books is that they get really detailed. If you listen to Dr. Gray's MCAT podcast, this one guy that's always on there, Paul, I think is his name, he's always like, the MCAT is all about a lot of content, but not going in depth. And I feel like, I don't know, you should listen to the podcast. I'll link it below because it's a great podcast. But the point is that like the MCAT covers a lot of topics, but not in depth. And I felt like the Princeton Review books went way too in depth, which I wouldn't have known that if this was my first time taking the test, but I knew from previously taking the test, like, okay, I don't need to know that nitty gritty of details on this topic. So that's my one complaint. Anyway, so content review is phase 1, and that's just going through all the chapters of the set of books that I had, which the most recent time was the Princeton Review. Phase 2 was passage-based practice. And phase 3 is really the same. The only difference between phase 2 and phase 3 is that phase 3 is all AAMC material. So I got the MCAT bundle, the question bank, the whole bundle that you can buy from AAMC, the full-length exams, I got that. And that's what I used for phase 3. And in the middle, it was passage-based practice with, I had some question practice from Next Step, but most of it was UWorld. And I love UWorld, but more on that later. So quick recap, the 3 phases that I had was content review, just going through all the chapters of all the books. And then second phase was a lot of passage-based practice. And third phase was same thing, but I only used AAMC material. And throughout that entire time, I was taking full-length exams to kind of track my progress. So the very first month that I started studying, it was way before I started studying, like December 7th, I took my diagnostic. I got a 498, and that is just to see where you're at. It does not matter what your score is. I see people all the time saying, oh my gosh, I got such a bad score. Is this bad? Like, no. Doesn't matter what you get on your diagnostic. It's just to see where you start out as. I got a 498, and I took the Princeton Review as my diagnostic full-length exam. So like I said, over winter holidays, I started doing a few chapters, organic chemistry, I think. But January is when I really started my content review. And what I did to divide up the chapters was basically say, okay, I want to get this done in 2 to 3 months, and I have this many days to do it. So I would just divide the amount of days I had to study by the amount of chapters I had to go through. Divide that, and then you know how many chapters you have to do each day. That's all I did. And yeah, you kind of just go through however many chapters a day that is for you. And along the way, you can kind of assess, okay, is this too many chapters a day, or is this not enough chapters a day? For example, I'm a huge fan of giving myself way too much work and realizing that 5 chapters a day is not realistic. So at that point, you kind of go back to the drawing board and say, okay, I need an extra 3 weeks so that I have a little bit less chapters to do each day, but I'm actually getting them done. So that was content review. I had the diagnostic before I started, and then towards the middle and end, I took 2 more full-length exams. Towards the middle, I took, again, the Princeton Review second exam that I had a total of 3, and I got a 502. And I was happy with that. I was like, okay, I'm halfway through content review. My points went up by 4 points, and I was happy. But then at the end of content review, around March, I believe it was March 12th, I got another 502, and I had a little bit of a panic. So I remembered that one of my biggest things from the first time was not doing enough passage-based practice, not doing enough full-length exams. And I was like, okay, hold up. Originally, I had planned after content review to go to the AAMC passage-based practice, which I don't know why I didn't have anything in between like content review and AAMC, but I didn't. And after I got that second 502, I was like, I need to add in more passage-based practice and full-length exams. So what I did was bought UWorld, best decision of my life, because their explanations are awesome. And then I got 4 next step exams. I think it was 4 plus like a half length. And then I spent 2 to 3 months doing passage-based practice. And so this was phase 2. How I made sure, one of the big things that I have always emphasized first time and second time studying for the MCAT was making sure that I go through all the topics equally. So I didn't want to have a really high score in psychology and a really low score in chemistry. I wanted to make sure that my scores across the board were as even as possible. And the way that I did that through phase 2 and doing a lot of passage-based practice was I had 3 days. It was either Chem Day, which is Chem Phys Day, because the first section of the MCAT is chemistry and physics. So it was either Chem Day, Biology Day, which basically the third section because it's Chem Phys, Cars, Biology, Biochemistry, Psychology, Sociology. So I divided it into those three categories: Chem, Bio, Psych. So even though there's a lot of subcategories, I divided it into 3 main days. And so let's say that I had 30 days to do phase 2, which obviously I had more than that, but just to give you an example of how I go about dividing each section. So let's say I have 30 days during phase 2 to get through all of my passage-based practice with UWorld before I go to AAMC. So 30 days, 3 categories, divide that by 3. So I have 10 days per category. So then I would go through and say, okay, I have 100 questions in each category. Divide that by 10. I need to do 10 questions a day. Obviously, I did more than that. So I have this right in front of me of kind of my sample schedule. I have Chem Day here. It was 59 Gen Chem questions. This was from UWorld. And then 40 physics questions. So I did chemistry and physics. And that day I did Gen Chem, but other days on Chem Day I would do organic chem. Bio Day, next day, 100 biochemistry questions. That was all that I did for that day. Next day, Psych Day, I did 100 psych questions. And then Biochem, Psych. So same thing, 100 biology questions, because the other bio day I did biochemistry. Chemistry, 59 organic chemistry questions, and then 39 physics questions. So Chem Phys, trying to get both those in there. And then Psych, same thing, 100 psychology questions. So that was the 3 kind of like science topics that I did. Chem, Bio, Psych, rinse, wash, repeat. And then every single day I did cars. So that's how I fit in my cars instead of having a whole day for cars. It was just the very first thing that I did every morning, and I never did more than 3 cars passages. And this is really dependent on what you think works best for you. But for me, what I wanted to do every single day was really deep dive into the passages and make sure I understood why I got the question right, why I got the question wrong, make sure I understood the main point of the passage. My whole car strategy is a topic for another video, but the reason that I only did a few instead of like some people will say, okay, I'm gonna do 4 passages a day this week, and then 5 passages a day next week, and then 6, and then build up to 9 passages a day or something. I don't know, like a lot, so they could build up their stamina. That was not for me. I wanted to do only a few so that I could really understand the nitty-gritty of each passage. So my schedule was start with cars. I would do anywhere from 1 to 3 passages, review it fully, like until I understood every detail of that passage. And then it was either Chem, Bio, or Psych Day. That was phase 2. And that was also phase 3, just with AAMC material. And then throughout that time, okay, so phase 2, right, like after I had gotten the 2 502s, I was really freaked out about my score. I went to going to the next step full lengths, and I have my scores pulled up right here on my iPad. So my first next step half length was a 510, which it seemed too easy in my opinion, just because from personal experience, I think that the practice exams are a lot harder than AMC practice exams, and this one just felt suspiciously easy. I got a 510 and I was like, oh, that's great, but I don't know. It was just, anyway, my first full length next step exam during phase 2 was a 505. I was like, okay, that's more accurate. I was probably really bummed that it went down 5 points, but the next step half length, in my opinion, seemed easy. And then throughout phase 2, I took another one. I got a 510, then a 512, then back down to a 510. And I'll talk about how I review full lengths at the end. But after phase 2, then I went to phase 3, which, like I said, was just going to the AAMC material. I didn't finish all of my UWorld passage-based practice, and that's just because there was too much. Like I said, I didn't originally plan to have that UWorld practice in there. I just kind of squeezed it in, and then my test date also got moved back to June 19th. So I wasn't able to finish it all, and that was fine. I probably did 3/4 of it, and I know for a fact that's a reason I did well, because that's something I didn't do the first time that I took it, and that's what I needed the first time. And I'm really glad that I bought UWorld. So once I got to phase 3, it was the same thing. The one thing that did change too was how I took the full length exams. So I'm always pretty strict when I take full length exams. Like I'll always like, if it's a 10-minute break, I only get 10 minutes. If it's a 30-minute break, like I'll eat during that mid 30-minute break. I simulate test day, but once I got to phase 3, I got even more into simulating test day. I think by that time I knew that my test would be at like 6:15 a.m. So I would take it at the same time that my test was going to be at. I also, for my last 4 tests, I got the exact same food that I was going to eat on test day. Probably a little overkill, but I wanted to know, like, I don't know, am I going to be ravenous if I eat 2 boiled eggs? I don't know. So I not only started at the same time as test day, I took all the exact same breaks I would have, and I ate the same food. I highly suggest that you simulate test day as close as possible once you're in that phase 3 or once you're in the A and C phase. So that's the only thing that I really change, is like being really strict on how I simulate test day. And then just getting through all the passage-based practice. I still did Chem, Bio, Psych, and then cars in the morning. That was my schedule for the last 4 months probably, because my test date got pushed back so far. And then as far as cars, there is one more thing that I want to mention. Obviously, cars needs to have its own video, but what I did for cars was, depending on the amount of questions, is how much time I had to do that passage. So if it's a 5-question passage, I had 8.5 minutes. 6 questions, I had 10 minutes. 7 questions, I had 11.5 minutes. And this takes practice, but I did this early on. As soon as I started phase 2, I started practicing this. And what I do is, okay, imagine I'm taking the test and I start passage 1 at 0 minutes. So it has 6 questions. I have to be done by the time the timer says 10 minutes. And then you go to the next question. I take a deep breath. I forget about the last passage, regardless of how terrible it was, and regardless of whether I had to rush to finish 1 or 2 questions. I get it done in 10 minutes, no exceptions. Okay, so say the second passage is 5 questions. Okay, the timer is at 10 minutes when you start the second passage. I have to be done by the time the timer says 18 minutes and 30 seconds, because I have 8.5 minutes to do a 5-question passage. I feel like I wouldn't blame you if you think that's ridiculous and you would rather just go with the strategy of 10 minutes for every passage. But for me, I don't know. It's just timing for cars was a big struggle for me, and that's what I decided was best for me. You have to decide what's best for you. But that is an option, is just doing that kind of timing breakdown. But you have to get used to doing the mental math in your head of like, okay, like sometimes it might be, I have to be done at 47 minutes. So doing that little bit of mental math when you're doing cars is not fun. But if you practice it during phase 2, phase 3, whatever you want to call it, it becomes pretty much like second nature, as long as like on test day, you're not like, freaking out and you don't do your timing. Anyway. So we covered how I kind of broke up my MCAT study schedule with phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Now I feel like we should really talk about how I reviewed my full lengths. And once I got towards the end, I would say the last 2 months, it was always Chem, Bio, Psych, full length, and then a day to review. And it's not like I did that every day, because obviously I had work in between that. But for my study days, that's how I did it. Chem, Bio, Psych, full length exam, review day. And that's what I just rinse, wash, repeat until I took the test. And I would say the first time that I reviewed my full length, I planned to do it in 1 day, and it took me at least 3 days because there was so much I didn't understand. There was so much I had to write down. And when I reviewed full length exams, I would look at every single question. I would try to understand, okay, I got this right. Why did I get it right? Did I guess? Did I understand the concept? Did I get lucky because I thought I knew and I actually didn't know? And then if I got it wrong, why did I get it wrong? What did I miss? So going over the full length practice exams is how I really tried to figure out where I can get better. What concepts don't I know? I had a template, and I'll link the template below. But I really reviewed every single question when I reviewed my full length exams. And then after that, after the first couple times, it got a lot quicker. So the first few full-length exams took me a couple days, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is taking forever. It's ruining my schedule. But the second half of the full-length exams that I took, pretty easy. Like, there weren't many concepts that I was missing over and over. There weren't many passages that I just did not understand at all. I would say when you take the AAMC full lengths, they have terrible explanations, and there was a lot of times where I got something wrong and I had no idea why, and reading the explanation did not help. In that case, you should copy and paste the question or something from the passage or one of the answers. Try it all until you find it on Google. But if you Google, like, say you just copy and paste the question into Google, you can most likely find that question on Reddit. And I'm not somebody that is like good with Reddit. Like, I don't really get it and don't use it on a daily basis. But if you just Google the question that you're trying to figure out, it's probably on Reddit, and somebody will have given this amazing explanation that, and this person writes 3 paragraphs and you understand it. And AAMC is just, I found that often I didn't understand why I got something wrong. I would Google the question, found it on Reddit, and completely understood. So make sure when you're reviewing your full lengths that you understand why you got it wrong. I think that was definitely key in being successful. I think the only thing left to talk about is what I did the week before I took the MCAT. And I took off the last 2 days, I believe. So I took it on a Friday. I took off Wednesday and Thursday. I did not study at all. I don't remember what I did, but I probably took my dog to the dog park. I probably got outside and enjoyed the summer and got my mind off the MCAT. I did take my last AAMC full-length exam was Monday. So Monday I took my last full-length exam, got a 519, a little slightly bummed that I got a 519 on the last exam, ended up getting a 516 on the real thing, but being in the top 10% was my goal, and I'm really, really, really happy that I got 516, which is the 93rd percentile, and obviously I had a successful application cycle, and it's not all about your stats, so being upset that I didn't get a 519 is really kind of ridiculous. Anyway, Monday was my last full-length exam. I spent Tuesday going over and reviewing that full-length exam. Wednesday, Thursday, completely had the day off, but I did drive to exactly where I was taking my exam, so I knew how to get there. I didn't have to worry about going to the right door. Like, I double and triple checked the email saying what door and what building. I packed my lunch the night before. I got everything ready, so all I had to do was wake up, eat the same breakfast that I had been eating for the past week. I was ready to go on test day. And after, I would say on test day, it felt really hard. To me personally, when I took the Princeton review, it was really, really hard because it was during content review and there was a lot I didn't know. And then I took the next step, and that was kind of medium. It was pretty hard, but I felt semi-confident because I was getting around 505, 510. Then when I took the AAMC exams, it felt so much easier. The practice exams compared to next step felt insanely easier. Not only that, but my score jumped. My first AAMC full length was a 516. I'm like, oh my gosh. And the second one I got a 516, which I'm like, okay, that's cool. I didn't improve my score at all. Third one, 517. Fourth one, 519. And that actually felt like the hardest to me, so I was surprised I got a 519. But on test day, it just felt really hard. I don't know. I felt really calm. I'm not the kind that gets really anxious or gets test anxiety. So I don't know. It just felt really hard to me compared to the AAMC full-length practice exams. So if I had to guess, I probably would have guessed I got less than a 516. Anyway, that's just how it felt to me. It was also the shortened exam because of COVID, which hopefully you guys watching this won't have to deal with. But that's how I felt on test day. I hope that I answered most of your questions. Just as really what I wanted to do was just tell you what my experience was. This is by no means telling you how to study for the MCAT. This is just what I have done, and a few things of what I did this time around was based on what I learned from the first time around. So I hope that this helped you.